Morning everyone, welcome to Deacon Prime and to Deacon. My name is Simon Han. I'm the CEO of Deacon Prime and our great privilege to host you here this morning. Very pleased. It's one of those topics. I've been calling it the new black design thinking, but it just seems to be popping up everywhere over the last 12 to 18 months, and I know it's been around for a lot longer than that, and it's seen considerable success, but it's really been, from a Deacon Prime perspective, the last 12 months that we've started to work with clients around helping develop capability around design thinking, and had the great pleasure to work with Sarah and Jonathan. They're a little bit jet lagged. They've just got back from the States. As I saw Jonathan this morning, he was tearing through the lobby with 2 big cans of Mother. So if he might be a little bit hyped up, that'll be the reason. So I'm sure we'll get his best. But thank you to the two of them. We've had the pleasure of working with them on a number of client projects recently. So thousands of businesses are transforming the way they work by adopting this new approach to design. And it's more than just a few buzzwords. It's making its mark across a whole range of industries. There was a recent study by the Design Management Institute that found that over a 10-year period, design-driven companies had outperformed the Standard & Poor's 500 by 219%. So it's something that's actually delivering business results and outcomes. So the purpose of today is really an opportunity to hear from leading practitioners in the field. We've got two parts of today. We've got Sarah and Jonathan, who I'll introduce shortly, who are practitioners, have been involved in this for quite some time. And then following that, Kurt Salate, who's the director of the IBM Design Studio in Melbourne, will be joining us. I believe he's currently sitting his citizenship test, is that right? Yep. So hopefully he passes, otherwise he might be in a great mood when he arrives. But I've had the pleasure of Kurt showing me through the IBM design tour down in South Bank, and it's just a fabulous what IBM are doing in that space. So that'll be terrific. But we're very fortunate to start with Dr. Sarah Colley and Jonathan Lincolne, who are both directors of a business called Pockets of Brilliance. Sarah and Jonathan are organisational psychologists who have over 30 years combined experience working with organisations globally. They have trained at Stanford D School, are design integration mentors with the federal government, and work with high growth potential organisations to innovate their business strategy, products and service through user insights and radical collaboration. They're about to take us through a session on understanding customers to help develop insights to drive organisational strategy and change. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Sarah and Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is called the management of perception. This is my water bottle. It's by a company called Evernote. It's lovely, isn't it? It's full of Monster. So just so you know. What we thought we would do today is instead of going through in 1 hour, which would not do it justice at all, instead of trying to go through a crash course in what is design thinking, which I'm sure a lot of you would know anyway, what we thought we'd do is try and share with you some insights regarding systems that would help you refine or mature your design thinking processes as you try to make them real and practical inside the organisations you work with. And then the other thing we thought we'd do is try to offer an insight into some mindsets or some mental schemas about design thinking that we are of the opinion a lot of the market is missing. The 219% improvement is a phenomenal figure, but I'll make the suggestion to you, not every business employing design thinking is achieving those results. Many of them are experiencing frustration. Many of them are experiencing a sense of disheartenment or a sense we must be a bit silly because we can't get this right. And there's a very, very good reason for that, and that is that the necessary mindsets, the necessary processes and the necessary leadership that must surround and support design thinking is not always present. The leaders and the organisations who get that right will experience phenomenal success. Those who don't will experience phenomenal frustration in our experience. So let's kick off. Pockets of Brilliance is both the name of our organisation and it's a philosophy that we have. And the philosophy behind our name is that we believe with sureness and humility that pockets of brilliance are possible to be created anywhere and everywhere. We're not out to change the world, but what we do believe is this. In any industry, an organisation could become brilliant. Within any organisation, a department could become brilliant. Within any department, a team could become brilliant. And within any team, an individual could become brilliant. Pockets of brilliance are possible anywhere and everywhere. And that's the philosophy that we work to. By way of introduction, as you know, that's me, ta-da, with a very, very clever rendering. This is Dr. Sarah Colley, this is her Kung Fu photo, which she'll be talking to us later. As was indicated, we're not designers. There are people who are much more well-versed, well-educated, and much more intelligent than us on design in and of itself. We're psychologists, and as such, we approach design thinking from a very, very human aspect. We look at the mindset, we look at the schema, we look at the ways of being that will fundamentally support and enhance the design thinking process. We've studied design thinking at Stanford's D-School, Illinois Institute of Technology, and UTS, and this is all just credibility building. I'm not sure why we have to do it, but apparently we do. We're mentors with the federal government and the Young Professional Organisation. Here's some of the people that we've worked with, all very impressive. So that's enough about us, about you. Some questions. What I would like you to do is we're going to have this thing called a 3-minute each chat. And the name tells you exactly what it is. You get 3 minutes each. Pretty self-explanatory. And the reason it's 3 minutes each is because there are 3 questions. Now, if you're in learning and development, organisational development, human resources, some type of development capacity in your role, could you just pop your hand up for me? Okay. All right. In my experience, you all talk too much. Okay, so you have 1 minute per question each, okay? And these are the 3 questions that you're going to talk with your neighbour about in just a minute. Firstly, why are they here? The answer, I want to know more about design thinking, is not an appropriate one. Okay, so really, why are you here, really? What do you want from today? The second thing is, what experience have you had with design thinking? And none is an appropriate answer, if you had none. And then the third thing is, how would you define design thinking in your own words? Not what do the tech books say, not what is it saying in Forbes magazine at the moment or anything. What do you think it is? What do you think it is? So everybody understands the parameters. 3 minutes each, 3 questions, 1 minute per question. Go! Okay. Alrighty, I'll get you to bring it in. Who in that conversation heard something from their neighbour that they thought was really interesting? What did you hear?
Well, talking about an experience, the way that you framed it in terms of design thinking, I am regurgitating your quote, design thinking being driven by the experience of the actual customer at the end, so that drives the entire design process. So
it's great.
That came from, I won't take credit.
No, she's exactly right, and lovely for not taking credit. Who else? Who heard something they went, oh heck, that was an interesting answer? Nobody. Everybody else was bored by their partners. No?
One of my table mates said that she thought she'd had exposure to design thinking, but she wasn't exactly sure. So what constitutes design thinking?
It's such a wonderful comment, and I would make the suggestion would epitomise and encapsulate to a large degree the experience increasingly of the marketplace at the moment regarding design thinking, and we hope we can offer just a tiny bit of clarity around that today. Yeah, because what's the common perception? What's the common? It is a myth. What's the common myth in our society about being creative, about being innovative? What's the myth?
Well, it just kind of flows from being right.
Yeah, it's a magical thing, isn't it? Like it's this light bulb moment, and out of nowhere comes this almost divine piece of. And in fact, Arun is totally correct. It is, in fact, a process, and it's a process that can be facilitated and developed and upskilled like any other skill. That's not to take away from the idea that there are people who are more creative and more innovative just naturally, but then there are people who can run fast too. But it is certainly a process that can be learnt, and we will suggest that a developed process, utilising what's called the slow hunch, and this is one of Sarah's big things, utilising slow hunch, is way more effective and productive over the long term than the one-off genius inspiration person. Yeah, these are very, very good points. Alrighty, so then this thing, design thinking, has almost become this ethereal, mystical, some almost would insinuate panacea for all of our troubles in business today. Let me clarify, it's not. Okay, what it is a simple mechanism that is very, very diverse. It's not a single thing, it's a very diverse group of things that, if understood and utilised well, can dramatically enhance your service or product offering, right through to the strategic way you design your business. If not understood and not used well, it will become nothing but a pain. It'll just become another thing that people will go, oh, well, that was just a fad. It's not a fad. It's a really, really well-researched, well-validated, well-proven methodology. It's just utilised really, really poorly. And we would refer to some of the articles and stuff we read nowadays, we talk about McD design thinking, because people have just popularised it to the point of a McDonald's franchise. Design thinking, technically, if we wanted to use the term just design thinking, academically, the term design thinking refers to what's called strategic design thinking, or transformation by design. Design thinking itself, in the strictest term, works at the very highest level of business, and Sarah's going to talk a lot more about this, and it is about using design thinking principles to inform the strategic direction of your entire organisation. Under that, or not under that, a part of that is a thing called product design thinking. Now, design thinking starts upstream and it has no outcome assumptions. It's total blue sky stuff. I utilise design principles to inform what could be, and I'm open to anything. Product design thinking starts downstream with a product creation assumption. There is a product, something that we're looking to improve or create or develop. We're going to be informed by our end user, but we have an assumption about what we're going to end up with at the end, and it will give us a product outcome. Service design thinking, same thing, but with a service outcome. Experience design thinking, same thing, but with an experience outcome. And so what we would suggest to you is this. Probably, if you wanted to get the most out of design thinking, probably the most valuable gift you could give yourself is to understand this. Because what you're reading on the pulses on your LinkedIn profiles, or in business BRW at the moment, or Forbes, or whatever you read about design thinking, is a mashup of all of these. And these are actually refined out even further, and Sarah's going to talk more about those. So if you can keep in mind that when you're doing a design thinking process, what process are you doing? What's its intent? And therefore, what products and tools and processes are you going to use? Alrighty, I want to tell you a story about how we utilised design thinking in a previous business, and how we thought we were doing very, very well, but actually weren't. I didn't know about design thinking at this stage. So, some time ago, 2000 and something, started an organisation, a company called Centus. The term Centus came from the Latin securus mens mentis. It was a shortening, which meant safe mind. And what the business did was, as a psychologist, we went into high-risk environments and we taught people how to use their brains well to keep themselves safe so they didn't die. Turned out it was very, very successful. There's some of the products that they have. We started in 2002. By 2010, we had revenues of about $14 million a year. We were widely recognised as having revolutionised the safety industry, moving from behaviour-based safety to what was called cognitive behavioural safety. Instead of moving from an externally motivated safety process, we engineered an internally motivated safety process. We were in BRW's 5 best places to work 4 years in a row. We won a number of awards. To date, 85,000 people have been through the course. We don't own that organisation anymore. We sold it some years ago. But unknown to us, we utilised many, many design thinking processes. So if you read this, you'd go, oh, give yourself a bit of a success on that, couldn't you? You know, and you'd think you were pretty good, and oh boy, we must have been pretty good. But what we've come to realise since then is we were successful. We were successful by design, but designed by accident. We didn't mean these things. Some of the design principles that we use that I'm going to go through in a moment, we were unaware of them, but they worked anyway. Let me show you an example. These are very, very certain design principles. Who's heard of any of these? If you've heard of in your fail fast, fail early, customer-led design, iterative methods, low-rise prototyping, industry disruptors, if you've heard of any of those terms, pop your hand up. Yeah, great, okay. So all design thinking terms, fair? We used all of these. We didn't know they were called that. We used all of these. However, I would like to be able to say we used all of these because we were really, really clever. Here's why we used them. We failed fast and failed early because I knew nothing about running a multi-million-dollar business. Okay, so that's why we failed, because I got it wrong. Failed fast, failed early, and we did so frequently. We followed the principle of customer-led design because we knew nothing about the mining and resource sector which we were working in. We had to go to our customers and ask. We had to find out how it was for them. We had to find out what did and didn't impact on them. We used an iterative method. And the reason we used an iterative method, again, wasn't because we were good design thinkers. It was because the psychology of safety was a brand new field or a brand new discipline. Nobody knew anything about it. And we were finding out as we went. We used low-res prototyping because we were self-funded and we couldn't afford high-res prototyping. And then finally, we were industry disruptors. Again, not because we set out to be, but because we were that special combination of arrogant and ignorant. We just didn't know any better. We thought we were so great, nothing could go wrong, and off we went and thought we could take on the whole safety industry, and we did. Here's the thing. All of these principles are valid. All of these principles work, whether you know about them or not, regardless of your motivation. They worked for us. But instead of happenstancing or just chancing on them, what we would suggest is that if you were to understand what is my intent in this design process, and thus what are the processes, tools, methodologies I should be employing in sequence, I might be able to get myself a very, very good outcome. And so innovation, as was highlighted over here, it's not an event, it's not a spark, it's not a moment in time. It's a very, very, very definite process. And so when we talk about being successful by design, not successful by design by accident, but successful by design, there's a very, very definite methodology in it. Some researchers down at UTS have developed a model which Sarah is going to talk to us about in just a second. But basically what it says is this. First and foremost, what is your value proposition? What is the value you're looking to create, and what is the value you're looking to capture on behalf of your end user and yourself? And that requires an innovation focus. That means somebody has to be zeroed in on that thing and only that thing. And then that innovation focus leads to or drives a set of activities. And these are well-documented activities. And if you do them, you get the result. And if you don't do them, you don't get the result. And then from there is that mindset, and Sarah's going to talk to us more about this, but there is that disciplined mindset, and it is, I will suggest to you, all but paradoxical to the current mindset of leadership and business at the moment, that is necessary to hold those other two in place and to steer that course towards genuine innovation on behalf of yourself and your clients. And so Sarah's going to talk to us more about this now.
So as Jonathan mentioned, this is a model that has been well researched, and Sam Buccalow from UTS has probably pioneered the way with this particular framework within Australian businesses, which shows the outcomes that we mentioned this morning of the potential success that can occur if we adopt these practices, mindsets and activities within businesses. But this is a whole of business solution. This is not a departmental solution. And often what we see in organisations are groups of product managers getting design thinking training, but then they go back to work and nothing's changed because there are no KPIs in place that encourage them to fail often and fail early. There are no incentives or rewards for collaborating across departments which are required. And so the structure of the organisation doesn't really support the product manager actually embedding these sort of practices on a day-to-day basis. So the success of design thinking comes when we become a design-led organisation. And so as Jonathan was saying, that happens from the top. And so these conversations, even if we are L&D, need to be happening at the board level. What is the board looking forward into the future for, and bringing back suggestions around our design and innovation strategy? Are the senior leaders on board with this approach? And if the senior leaders are on board, then you can start to structurally change the way in which people on the ground lower in the organisation actually start to adopt these types of strategies. So I'm going to go back a couple of steps, and then at the end we'll talk a little bit about creating a climate for innovation within an organisation. So, context setting. I heard this term from somebody recently that we're in the age of infobesity. So innovation is a word, a buzzword, and I actually hate being associated with the term innovation. We're innovated by nature. We're human beings. Everything we see around us has come from an innovation. Something that the human mind has thought up and brought into fruition. So the fact that there are consultancies and a need for us to be innovative, I think there's a mindset and an error in our thinking. We are inherently innovative. However, the structures that are in place in organisations and the context that we operate within in this particular day and age, I think is sparking our need to innovate and change more quickly than we have previously. So we keep moving and moving and moving, and there's estimates that by 2020, the amount of knowledge that we know will double every 12 hours. That's unprecedented. And so it's these sorts of things that are sparking panic amongst businesses who once were able to be stable and look backwards to predict what they needed to do in the future, and now they find themselves becoming irrelevant overnight because a company suddenly pops up because things change so quickly. It's estimated that 50% of children currently in primary school will be in jobs that don't currently exist. So these are some of the impetuses that are creating the panic and the buzz around innovation. And so again, I come back to this point. How do we as Australian companies stack up against other companies? Because now we are genuinely a global community of businesses. We genuinely have global competition. And in a recent study on competitiveness, we rated 22 out of 148. So as a country, we're actually not that innovative when it comes to businesses. When we look at the types of innovations that Australia is producing, you can see here, let me get my red clicker, that we tend to focus more on incremental innovations. So what that means is a business will be successful and then it will funnel back its money into continuous improvement activities. That's needed to improve your product line. However, we are not taking some of that funds to filter into alternate disruptive innovation activities. And based on this, we're not particularly good at producing radical things for export. So when you look forward into the future, there's a genuine concern about our effectiveness as a country to be competitive, and then the long-term implications that will have on our perceived wealth at the moment. So there is a genuine impetus for change to occur. This is another interesting thing that's starting to emerge recently. This would describe where our effort for innovation is typically directed. We could direct it around financial business models, process, our offerings or delivery. We spend a lot of effort and money looking at how do we deliver better offerings. That's in the product domain. So that's where money's spent. That's traditional R&D activities. But when you look at the return, it's actually not delivering the outcomes that we would expect. And what we're starting to see is that businesses who are clever start to innovate and spend money and get a return when they're looking at their business model and their financial models. They're also starting to get a return greater over here when they're looking at delivery and service experiences. So this is the different types of innovation that we should possibly be starting to look at. So tipping our business models upside down. When you have that conversation with leadership teams, it makes them very anxious. But what we do with them is get them to imagine and pretend and hypothesize about different business models, just to enable them to start to think through what could be possible. And so they start to apply the design thinking principles in this realm of possibility. So this is all context setting to, set the scene for innovation isn't a buzzword. It isn't the cool thing that we need to do. I think as a nation, and we might be in the room here as business competitors, but as a nation, we're in real trouble potentially. And there is a genuine need for us to start to disrupt some of the hierarchical, bureaucratical types of organisational structures that actually inhibit us from innovating so that we can create new industries within Australia to provide for the future generations. So some questions for you. Take a couple of minutes to talk to the person next to you. What products and or services do you and your company currently deliver that reinforce your strategy and, more importantly, that keep you relevant? And who are your customers and what are their problems? 2-minute conversation and then we'll kick on into the next bit. I'm going to assume that was a really engaging conversation because I did say bring it back in 3 minutes ago. I think you guys heard me. And then the conversation kept happening, which is awesome. So I'm curious, how easy were these questions to answer? And the main thing here is around relevant. Are we confident? What was the conversation that was going on? You're looking at me, so you get chosen. How was the conversation for you? Are you relevant? Are you confident that what your products are reinforcing your strategy and that you will be relevant into the future?
We kind of approached it, we struggled with the first question and moved on to the second one and kind of got a little bit off course and sort of talked more about how leadership fits into innovation and what's expected of leaders in terms of their skill set.
Do you want to elaborate?
We talked about the fact that I guess leaders are they're the public face of an organisation, they're the primary decision maker and everyone expects them to back themselves. And so a certain amount of ego is involved in that. However, there has to be a sense of self-awareness and awareness of others and humility to have a well-rounded approach.
I would totally agree with you, and something we'll talk about in a second is this shift and mindset from a CEO, which is directive, I have to have the answers, I can't be wrong, and is fundamentally and diametrically opposed to the mindset that is actually required to be effective in the current environment that we operate. And you can say it's humility or ego. I think it's just an awareness of no one has the answers. Yeah. So let's be open to cross-pollinating with different industries, bring those in, ask other people, involve, collaborate. And it would seem that those traits seem to be more feminine and maybe not as valued potentially or expected by those in the top rungs. And that's the main challenge that I think we observe and face. So off-topic conversation, but I think very relevant still. How do we go with the relevance question? Does everyone feel very comfortable that the work you're doing day in, day out will ensure that you'll be relevant into the future? You're looking at me. What do you think?
Well, your questions were so poignant and just hit the mark with us, where our current problems, and we're really struggling because we're the IT part of a very traditional organization, long-standing traditional, and we're trying to be relevant, but just as you were describing, within an environment that's so traditional that it's been hard, and we're not being successful for those reasons. So relevant. So that's our struggle, is that in making that change. And we know we're not as relevant as we could be.
And how do you think you get to know?
But just like you were saying, asking.
Yes.
But that's the problem that we're having, is that we're not being allowed to, or we're just starting to, because the seniors say that they want to make the decisions. They know what the customers want, and they know how to solve it. And that hasn't been working. And so we're trying to get them to ask the customers themselves, and they're finding that as a challenge, and they don't want to.
It comes back to this point. The number of leaders we've worked with, and when we start to work with them and we say we're going to go out and interview, the look on their faces is like they've just seen a ghost. They're petrified and terrified, and then they come back and they're energized and they're like, that was amazing. But it's not what we're taught to do, and it's not what we're expected to do. So there's this whole stigma around it. How do we go answering the question, who are our customers? Do we really know who our customers are? If we're in L&D, who are our customers? I don't know what other roles we're in. Does everyone able to answer that question? Are we sure we know who our customers are and who we're serving? You're giving me a slight nod. Right.
Yeah, ultimately in banking, it's the retail and institutional customers. We're ultimately there to support what the business supports.
And how much detail could you describe to me about those customers? Because there's a bucket, it's a segment.
Yeah, I could put them into a variety of buckets,
Yep.
yes.
Okay. What about our approaches to innovation. What approaches are we currently using for innovation?
I'm currently studying, so I couldn't tell you, but I could tell you my recent professional experience that there is no real structured approach to it.
Okay.
In my exposure, it's been a very periodic kind of workshop-based experience. It's fantastic, but it isn't implemented in a way that I have experienced it. So,
is that a common experience for those? Do we have structured approaches to innovation currently in our businesses? I've got a no over here. Structured approaches, inconsistent. What about the group over here?
We've got a bit of inconsistency. We've got people who are wanting us to promote design thinking, but we are yet to still learn it ourselves. But it's an expectation that we should be doing it. But the people that know a little bit more about it aren't really supporting us in doing that, hence us being here today.
Yeah.
It's part of...
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a struggle.
Yeah. Structured approaches, unstructured approaches to innovation in your businesses. Unstructured. So this is pervasive across organisations. One of the challenges I think for all of us is to manage up with some of this as well. So let's keep moving forward. Design thinking sometimes gets a little bit of a misnomer as it's a thinking thing. It's actually a doing thing. And there's levels of design in businesses. I think it's sometimes helpful to show people this, to give them an understanding of maybe where are we currently at with our design thinking journey. So it goes from being design unaware, there's just no design involved in our business, in our product services or even in our thinking. Then we can have design for styling, and this is traditionally what happens. We have all the leaders think up the ideas, they say here's what we want to build to the development team, and the designers might come in at the end to make it look pretty with the user interfaces. As we get more, mature in our thinking, we can start to use design as an innovation process where we might want to have a product and we engage customers, we iterate with them, and we have a product innovation. But here, as we move forward, is when we start to look at involving it in our business strategy. Others, particularly Sam Buccolo, is moving into this space here where he's looking to use design to transform sectors in essence. So design is not anything special. Design is just a discipline. We all have our own disciplines, and it just happens though that designers and their discipline are taught certain skill sets that actually are quite required in our day-to-day business today. They're taught to be open to possibilities as opposed to have their answers. They're taught to radically collaborate. They're taught to reframe problems as opposed to fix problems. So this is what they're taught to come up with products, but these skill sets and these mindsets just so happen to be really helpful for businesses today. As we mentioned this morning, there is a return on investment for design, and so what I'd like to spend most of the time here is talking about design as a management capability. You mentioned it beautifully, and it's your observation. There's a book out that would probably be helpful to have a read. It's called the DEO. So instead of having this CEO mindset, where the top executive has one-way communication, where they maintain stability and order. They don't like to fail. They don't like to be seen as wrong. I think it's part ego, but I think it's just part what we've been told is how you run a successful organisation from the top. There needs to be a shift into this more DEO type of mindset where it's still aspirational, but you experiment and you improvise. You're comfortable with ambiguity. You're comfortable saying to your leadership team, I don't know what we need to do, but I think if all of us went out and focused on understanding this part of it and come back together, perhaps we could. If that was some of the mindset and skills that were being, adopted at the senior levels, we'd start to see a shift occur. So this is an important, mindset change. If you want to take that to a more granular level and make it a little bit more concrete, the design capability that's actually required sits under 3 buckets. Senior leaders, product managers need to have skills around understanding deep customer insights. They need to have skills around how to engage customers in product and service development. And then these 2 things need to feed into new business models. So what do we mean by those? Building empathy means building deep understanding of customers' day-to-day lives. And this isn't just about testing for functionality, which is typically what customer engagement is. It's about stepping outside and observing what happens in their broader context. So there's a whole range of qualitative anthropological style research methodologies that can be taught to managers to enable them to deeply empathise with their customers, so they don't have to come up with ideas. They understand their customers and the need emerges, and from that understanding of the need, the solution becomes apparent. Customer engagement, once you have an understanding of their needs, you actually then engage with them early in the co-creation of the solution, to test your assumptions, to test your understanding. And it's actually a more cost-effective strategy because you're not spending $100,000 on a high-resolution prototype that you put into the market and you just hope will be successful. You are, from the very beginning, getting the insight, co-creating with your customers to ensure that anything that's put back into the business is more likely to be successful. So let me give you a bit of an example of this in action. Has anyone heard of the Greenhouse Project? Greenhouse Project is, I guess, a disruptive innovator in the field of aged care. So aged care around the world is typically done in a very institutionalised model. You take the hospital model and you basically relabel it to aged care facilities. It's expensive, there's lots of equipment, there's lots of services, and if we're really honest, it's probably it's a place where none of us probably want to end up. It's not actually meeting its needs for the end user or the actual service providers because it's expensive and governments are funding it and it's becoming a problem. These guys tipped the problem on its head. They engaged a range of elderly people, their end users, and together understood what were the problems. The elderly didn't like living in a hospital-like environment. It wasn't enriching. So they sought to understand what is it that they do want. They wanted to live in a community. They wanted to be involved in having a say in what happened in that community. They wanted to make it more like home, but they knew they couldn't live at home. So they sought to deeply understand what the need was, and then they prototyped with them. And so they came up with this concept of the greenhouses. They're houses that house about 20 people. It has one member who's there full-time, obviously on rotating shifts, but the elderly who live there have a say in how the house is run, what's done there, and it's like living at home. And these smaller communities are distributed, and there's about 300 of them now. And not only is it a more effective environment for the end user, their financial model here actually has radically disrupted the existing systems. It's far cheaper to build one of these and maintain it because it doesn't need the overheads and the infrastructure and the staff to do it. Simple solution, but we're not even thinking like this at a sector level. And if this was an approach, just for instance, that was adopted here for our aged care, there'd be a lot more people who would be happier and we'd be saving a lot of money as well. So this is the type of thinking that sometimes when we're in an industry, we get stuck in, well, this is just how it is. How do we change it? You need to step outside of it. So deep customer insight, co-creation, brand new business model. So when we're talking about some of the things we just mentioned, people would be saying that the capability that's required is a better understanding of customer insights to then drive strategy. And we need a mindset that focuses on developing creativity. And I know people say that, but I think our bureaucracies stifle our ability to actually be creative. It's very easy for ideas to get knocked down. Even if they might not go anywhere, people say nope, and so it stops. We need to have a better understanding of customers, and we need to be checking our assumptions more often as opposed to being focused on solving a problem. So the premise that designers would come at is that they would spend way more time in this space here, having a look at many divergent options. Doesn't mean we're going to do any of them, but you need to at least explore as many divergent options to ensure that when you do actually come to a solution, it's probably the right solution. In business, we actually probably spend most of our time here. This exploration, this curiosity, this openness, this what about this, and is actually something that's not encouraged. And most senior leaders say, here's the time frame we need to deliver, that is good, let's deliver. So they actually limit their outcomes. So questions that you can, rhetorical, does your organisation know deeply who its customers are, and do you have the management capability to capture the customer insights to guide your strategy? Okay, has everyone heard of a persona? Has anyone used them? Raise your hand. You've used them? Yep.
I did, a while ago, I did a lot of work with user-centred design,
yes,
which is centred around personas and
yes,
user stories. And
yes,
sort of case
fantastic. Okay, so a persona, it's basically starting with the end in mind. The end in mind is that we understand our customer. To understand our customer, we actually need to know what their problems are, what their needs are, so that we can solve a solution for them. Here are some questions that I'm going to get you to write down about one of your customers. But first, I'd like to have a think. Do we actually really genuinely know who our customer is? This is just a generic supply chain. You will have your own version of your supply chain. There's a company that has inputs into it, and then the outputs to your end user. And I guess the question is, which bucket does our customer sit in? Who are we actually serving here on a day-to-day basis? And fundamentally, we often get this wrong. And I'll give you an example. GE were making equipment, and they thought that their customer were the doctors, and so they focused all their attention on making their equipment technically excellent, and it was. But it still wasn't delivering on the results. Their real customer was the end user here. That was the patient who was using the equipment. And the patients, some of the time, were children. And the children were having to be anaesthetised to actually go into some of their equipment. And from that perspective, that was creating stress for the nurses because it increased their time that they had to spend with the clients. So by turning their perspective closer towards the end user, the kids and the nurses, they were able to innovate different ways to make their equipment more friendly and open. So sometimes we think our customer is here, but how far down the chain do we actually consider who is our customer? So for this activity, I'd like you to have a think about a project you're working on at the moment. Who is your customer? Who are you trying to actually serve? It might be an internal customer. It might be an external customer. And I'd like you to, in as much detail as you can, describe their role in the value chain. What are their specific challenges? What is the value proposition for this customer? So take a couple of minutes, write it down as much as you can, and we'll come back together as a group. The point of this is when we work with companies, a lot of the time, they think they know the customers, but if you dig a little bit deeper, the regular habits of continuing to engage with them to gain empathy are often misaligned with what they find when they move forward. So I'm just going to very quickly over this for time so we can move on for the end. A climate within an organisation drives innovation. What is a climate? It's the prevailing conditions within an organisation. Organisations can have a climate for service, a climate for learning, a climate for safety, and you can also have a climate for innovation. Some organisations stifle innovation, the bureaucracies. Some organisations have too much innovation and then nothing's actually delivered. And then some organisations actually get it right, where they have this great balance between creativity and execution. And so this area of climate for innovation is something that Jonathan and I work within. In my PhD, climate is an area that I've researched before, and it's a lead indicator of performance. And so what we're finding is that if companies can develop these sets of capabilities, you can actually start to create the right environment internally to develop innovation within the organisation. And the main things we're finding are this: we need the leadership to be strategic, purposeful and distributed. We need performance and reward to be linked to innovation activities, and then we need these 6 things to be reinforced by our leaders. We need to have people being comfortable with being agile, collaborative, disciplined, experimental, consistent and values driven. And these would be the things as L&D that you'd be starting to say, are our capability frameworks actually supporting these types of things to be embedded within our organisations?
Give a little
little bit more consistent? It looks, with the other words that are there, consistent looks a little bit out of place. Could you describe what you actually mean by that?
I'll link it back to the experiences that were reflected back in the room before. When I asked the questions, what are your innovation strategies? And we went, we might have an ideas session. There's a consistent discipline to innovation. We don't just go and innovate once a month. There's a consistency to it. We have a regular process in place whereby we can seek to understand customers. We have a regular process whereby internally we collaborate to see what's next. We're continually looking forward. And so yes, you're right. Innovation is sometimes seen as this cool thing, but there's a consistent discipline that goes to it. Google, the likes of those, would be great examples of companies that have a consistency to them. I'm going to hand back to Jonathan, who is just going to have a wrap up here and talk through how do you actually land some of this in organisations.
If we pick up the theme of consistency in our innovation practices and our methodologies, what I wanted to do just to finish up is at least seed the idea of a process that you could utilise if you wanted to, that would help give some structure and framework to the design thinking process, whatever your design thinking looks like, whether it's design thinking for products or services or experience or design thinking at a strategic level. I won't be able to go through the whole process with you because we don't have time to do so, but there's an increasing body of research on it. And if you wanted to just Google it, you'll be able to find stuff, and most of you will be able to integrate it yourselves. And if you want more information or some more thoughts on it, then we can certainly help you with that. Design thinking at the moment in the common business vernacular is a mashup. In reality, it's not. It is a group of discrete, researched, validated practices that, if utilised effectively and well, will dramatically increase the likelihood of success of your product or your service or your experience or your strategic delivery. But what designers themselves aren't that great at is the methodical, structured nature of things. And so what we wanted to do now is talk about a process that might help you. I'm just going to express some assumptions that I have before I go into this section and just see whether they resonate with you or not. Everybody here knows the fundamentals of when we talk about design thinking. Everybody's seen something like this, some circles and some bubbles, or it's 4Ds or something. Is there anybody who's never seen? Everybody's seen it. Would that be fair? Okay. Second assumption, is everybody aware of or familiar with this squiggly line of design? Yeah. All right, put up your hand if some days you wish that thing was dead, like you hate that squiggly line of design. No, because why? What is that? What does this thing give us sometimes? What does it leave us with?
Kind of just frustrates because you think you got to follow some sort of crazy process.
Yeah, well, sometimes I might think I've got to follow this, and other times I go, I've got no way out of this hellhole. It's going nowhere. Yeah.
It also kind of implies that there's just one solution.
So you're saying there's a line I've got to follow, and I've got to follow it all through, and that's the way. That's the way through. Oh, I have never ever thought of it that way. That's an interesting thought. Anybody else in their design thinking process has ever been frustrated? Ever had that sense? What are we doing here? Are we going back to talk to customers? Didn't we just talk to customers? How often do I have to talk to customers? God, they're annoying. Anybody else ever had that frustration? Wouldn't it be nice if all of our design thinking processes actually looked and went like that? Wouldn't it be lovely if there was actually a defined stage and we could define, and we never had to come back to it. We just got to write it. And then we could ideate, prototype it, build it, we analysed it, and then after all that went smoothly through, we just went back and did it. Has anybody ever had that experience? No, me neither. Okay, so here's what I'd like to offer you. We're mashing up two totally separate disciplines here, but in our experience, the mashup has worked. And it's through the process of Agile Scrum. Now, when I first heard about Agile Scrum, I thought it was wondrous. Just like when I first heard about design thinking, I thought it was wondrous. Somewhere along line, we have brought the two together. Is anybody aware of or heard of, who's heard of Agile methodologies for product management? Everybody's heard of Scrum, obviously. Is anybody really familiar with Scrum? Would anybody say, oh, yep, I don't know if you're going to talk about this. I didn't want to steal your thunder, so I just thought I'd mention it quickly. I thought you were going to get here later anyway, and I could sneak it in before you got here. What Agile Scrum is it is a part of a larger project management suite of tools, but it aligns and supports design thinking very, very well. I'm not going to go through how we use them together today because that would take too long, but I just want to show you why we think they go together very well. Agile Scrum basically is an iterative framework designed for the completion of complex projects. Does that sort of sound a little bit like design thinking? Scrum was originally created for software development, but it works well in any complex, innovative work. Does that sort of sound like design thinking? Scrum facilitates the formation of high-performing, self-directed teams that seem to be more collaborative, innovative, and creative. Wouldn't that be lovely if we all worked in those? And Scrum can bring some rigor to this squiggly line of design. Now, we've been putting these two things together for some time now, and we've got it wrong a lot. Sometimes we've actually caused ourselves more frustration than we have solved any problems. But of late, we seem to have been able to work out both the practical and philosophical differences of the two. And it seems like all of a sudden our design thinking processes, utilised under a fairly tight, but with some flexibility, Scrum methodology, is bringing us tremendous success. And more than anything, it is alleviating that sense that we sometimes get of where are we in this? What are we doing this for? Why are we? Because the Scrum methodology is giving us that guidance. And so what we would suggest to you is that's worth your consideration is that Scrum and design thinking are a great union. Both of them use iterative processes that encourage inspection, adaptation, and transparency. Both value early and frequent failure via end-user feedback processes. Both are orientated towards outcomes that would delight the customer. That is their goal. Design thinking is excellent for ideation. It's excellent for idea creation. Scrum is excellent for execution. Putting feet on the ground, putting bodies on the ground, rubber hitting the road, getting it done. Once we've gone broad, once we've ideated and interviewed and got customer insights and empathy and we genuinely understand what they're saying to us, and now we need to synthesize back down and we've got to get something done, Scrum is a wonderful methodology for doing so. So here's our suggestion to you. There are these two references here. This book is about 11 pages, 17 pages, Kurt. This one is about 9, right? You get this on Amazon for $3.99 and this one's free. You just got those two books, you'd know Scrum in about 2 hours, I would think. And then I haven't got it up there, but if you wrote Scrum at DT and you Googled that, there's a whole body of research now. There are people who are actually conducting semi-academic, but pretty good formalised research on how the two methodologies can align even more effectively. So it was something that we just lucked upon, but we think that it would be worthwhile. And for those of you who are practitioners of it, we would strongly encourage you to at least have a look at it. Could I make a request? If you go down this path and it really works for you, would you please contact us? We're looking for people to further, because we think it can add something genuinely great to design thinking. So just as we finish up, are there any questions, concerns, or violent objections to anything that's been offered today? Oh, short break. We're going on a short break.